Hello, this is a presentation focusing on some of the research outcomes of my PhD, the Enchanted Water Garden at the Never-Ending Colour Wall, a studio research project on the radical potential of beauty. It's a project that asks the question, can beauty be seen to have any association with radical thought in art today? So if you just turn to images 1 and 2 now, Bali on a blue day, there's an overview and a detail. Just view them in your own time as I'm talking. In this presentation, I'll present a set of propositions for the research outcomes, referring to the methodologies used and the documentation of the research. So to begin, the answer to my research question is yes, beauty can be seen to have radical association with art today, and my art is an example of this. This is because that, firstly, in its autonomous nature, it is a model of otherness. If you look at my work, Bali on a Blue Day, in image 1 and 2, I propose that this otherness in my art works in a similar way to beauty in nature, and my art's otherness is what makes it beautiful. So please turn to my next work, images 3 and 4, The Outsider. This is a painted public artwork on the Telstra Exchange in St Kilda. Secondly, I propose that if we consider the agency of prettiness, the power of pretty's frivolousness and its capacity to stop thought, my work challenges the authoritarianism of the idea, dominant in Western art history. In this way, we could say that my art is a feminist text. As a feminist text, I also propose that it is the smaller territory of the beautiful, as opposed to the vastness of the sublime, in which beauty becomes politically active in my art. I will discuss these ideas more in depth in the second video, but first I'd like to tell you how and why the project was established, and provide some general comments on the documentation of the research. Firstly, to provide some background, prior to the research period, my work looked very different and was often engaged in overt politics. In 2004, for example, I made a street poster project titled Liar, on the subject of violence against women in football culture. At the time, I noted that in addition to the work's political statement, it had a strong aesthetic and formal side that was effective in getting the message across. I became very interested in this aesthetic aspect, and the work organically grew into the practice for the PhD. The practice is a group of discrete sculptures made with artificial flowers and resin that sometimes combine carved or painted elements and a painted public artwork, The Outsider, an 80 square metre painted patterned artwork. So please now view images 4 and 5, Rosebud, while I'm talking. The practice for the PhD was inspired by Bali, a place I find very beautiful. There I glide around in the ocean over underwater worlds. Pools of water are flooded into bright green rice fields, and colourful or checked fabrics adorning shrines and trees are found in abundance in the public environment and catch my eye. Most of all, there is a simple, spectacular craft practice in Bali. Bowls of water are found all over the public environment decorated with flowers. The floral resin works are a trajectory of works in response to this. The brickwork is partially inspired by the public decorative fabrics in the built environment that act like skins around architectural structures. The floral resin works act more obviously as a type of document of lived experience, although it was very important to me, and this is a concept that appears repeatedly in the research, that these works were not an exact duplication of what I saw. I thought to do this would seem kitsch. I'd like to talk now more about the methodology used to produce the studio works, as it is the practice that oriented the PhD. My approach was intuitive and sensory. Firstly, I was extremely interested in the aesthetics of what I was making, how the work would look formally, what colour schemes, for example, to use for the bricks, or what flowers were suspended more successfully in the resins, or what might be a now version of beauty. Secondly, there were no conscious preconceived ideas for these works. They were not logical outcomes, for example, of a set of theories, or a preconceived plan to fashion a political statement. I wanted the works to retain their autonomy. By the word autonomy, and I know this in hindsight after my research, I use the term autonomous in art as German philosopher Theodor Adorno conceives of it, as social mimesis. That the works were not fully integrated with the world around them was something I encountered as an approach to practice on my MA at Goldsmiths College in London in 1994. I retained collegial allegiance with this approach to art making, and the works were carried out in this fashion. I think that the subjective methodologies engaged in the studio lend my art a degree of originality, as I've not encountered any art in my research that is of a similar nature. Engaging this overtly intuitive and sensory methodology enabled a major methodology to emerge that is echoed throughout the thesis and which orientates the PhD. This is that the sensory nature of the practice gave way to serious art historical scholarship and not the other way round. This method enabled a radical space to be created for beauty, echoed in concepts that drive the exegesis. I have identified, for example, with a concept fashioned by Derrida, Deleuze and Guattari, and Jeremy Gilbert-Rolfe from Gilbert-Rolfe's book published in 2011, Art After Deconstruction. This suggests that the frivolous, or pretty, contains the power to challenge the fascism of the idea that dominates Western art history. Once the practice had been substantiated, I turned from the studio to the field to consider a research question. I thought that as the work had been inspired by beauty, I would focus on beauty. I knew of several exhibitions in recent history about beauty. These included Alexander McQueen's Savage Beauty at the MoMA, New York, or the 2000 exhibition named Regarding Beauty, a view of the late 20th century at the Herschel Museum. But when I started to research beauty, I found a problem, and this was that exhibitions about beauty might be common, but in conventional art theory, for example, Hal Foster's The Anti-Aesthetic, the subject of beauty was regarded as nostalgic or conservative. In an essay in 2009, American art theorist Michael Richter noted that the anti-aesthetic position, which I argue in the exegesis remains dominant in art today, is institutionalised, long after artists have once begun to speculate on the beautiful. Other literature I'd read, for example American philosophers Arthur C. Danto's book, approached the subject of beauty as a worthy subject in contemporary art, conservatively and cautiously. While endorsing artists working with beauty, he deemed it revivalist, or a return, rather than as a point for critical departure. Others I'd read wholeheartedly supported artists invoking beauty today. These were British art historian Elizabeth Pretterjohn, whose book in 2005 questions critical underpinnings of the anti-aesthetic suspicions of beauty, and American scholar Wendy Steiner's book, The Rejection of Beauty in 20th Century Art. This establishes a feminist discourse for contemporary female artists using the life model. But the quote that stuck in my mind was from American cultural theorist Dave Hickey, who famously said in 1993 in his book on beauty that if images don't do anything, then why are we sitting around at the end of the 20th century still talking about them? I started to think that what was more important was the agency of beauty, what beauty does, as opposed to a more outdated view that somehow beauty is inherent in the object. And as my work engaged all sorts of subject matter that had been associated with the beautiful in philosophy and popular culture, for example flowers, nature and decorativeness, I decided to consider the agency of beauty in relation to my own work. In order to contribute to critical thought that redresses the imbalance between practice and theory, I decided to test the notion in the research that beauty may in fact be associated with radical politics today. The suggestion that radical ideas about beauty are embedded in the text of my own art, an Australian practice informed by Bali on the subject of beauty, in the specific ways I have alluded to, is the PhD's original contribution to knowledge. The resulting exegesis, while not a contextualising grand narrative for the practice, speaks to the viable politics of beauty operating in the work. Within this framework, other areas of practice are incorporated, for example, materiality. All these components, however, feed into the politics of the project. As the work is very personal, in that the practice is based on what I find beautiful, it seemed fitting for the exegesis to be a connective document. This is that the exegesis combines the first-person subjective and autobiographical voice That's the commentary model, and the more scholarly third-person voice used in art history, philosophy and cultural theory, the contextual model. The resultant text is an alternative to the more unified traditional third-person academic text. It incorporates an aspect of feminism. Feminist theorist Donna Haraway has written a feminist critique of the traditional unified academic text written in the third person. Now I want to finish up here for now because we're running out of time for the video, but in the second video I'll talk more about how the exegesis informed the practice and specifically about the content of the exegesis. This will lead to the discussion about the politics of otherness and prettiness operating in my practice.